What makes conversations like this so frustrating is not that people want children. People can want whatever they want. The frustrating part is the complete collapse of moral reasoning that seems to occur the moment reproduction enters the discussion. Suddenly, standards that would apply everywhere else vanish into thin air. For 23 minutes, these women talk about dreams, fulfillment, purpose, meaning, faith, family, legacy, motherhood, and personal happiness. Yet the one individual who will actually bear the consequences of the decision barely exists as more than a decorative background object. The child is discussed the way people discuss a degree, a house, a career, or a vacation. It is something they want, something they hope for, something that would enrich their lives. The future person is reduced to a supporting actor in a story that is entirely about the emotional desires of the adults. What amazes me is how nobody notices this. Imagine sitting through a 20-minute conversation about buying a dog where every sentence begins with, I want, I dream, I deserve, I would feel fulfilled, and this would make me happy. Most people would immediately recognize that the speaker is talking about themselves. Yet the second the subject becomes reproduction, everyone suddenly starts calling the exact same self-interest selflessness. The word loses all meaning. Creating another person because you want to experience motherhood is not selfless. It is literally impossible for it to be selfless because the desire originates entirely within the person making the decision. The future child is not requesting existence. The future child is not petitioning for life. The future child is not standing outside reality desperately hoping somebody will manufacture them. The entire project begins and ends with the preferences of the prospective parent. Calling that altruism requires intellectual gymnastics so extreme that Olympic judges would deduct points for excessive spinning. The thing that really kills me is how casually everyone skips over the actual contents of existence. Listen carefully to these conversations and you'll notice a strange pattern. Birth is discussed endlessly. Childhood is discussed endlessly. Family is discussed endlessly. Meaning is discussed endlessly. But somehow disease, aging, grief, anxiety, loss, physical deterioration, and death are treated like embarrassing relatives nobody wants to invite to the wedding. It's like watching a car salesman enthusiastically describe heated seats, Bluetooth connectivity, and fuel efficiency while neglecting to mention that every vehicle explodes after an unpredictable number of miles. You would probably consider that a relevant detail. Yet people talk about creating a new conscious being while acting as though mortality itself is some obscure technicality rather than the unavoidable conclusion of the entire process. And then, as always, somebody reaches for the emergency escape hatch. But life has beautiful things too. Of course it does, you magnificent intellectual refrigerators. Nobody is disputing that life contains positive experiences. The question is whether positive experiences justify imposing the entire package on somebody else. Those are not the same question. They have never been the same question. Yet humanity spends centuries treating them as interchangeable. Imagine a doctor telling you that a procedure comes with chronic pain, emotional suffering, severe losses, bodily decline, and eventual death. Then when you object, he responds, yes, but sometimes sunsets are pretty. This would not be regarded as a compelling rebuttal. It would be regarded as evidence that the doctor suffered a traumatic head injury. Yet somehow, when reproduction is involved, this exact level of reasoning becomes socially acceptable. The obsession with motherhood itself is equally bizarre. Motherhood is spoken about almost like a sacred mystical transformation that automatically elevates every desire associated with it beyond criticism. Nobody ever seems to stop and ask why wanting to reproduce is automatically considered noble while every other desire remains open to scrutiny. If I desperately wanted a mansion, people would ask whether my reasons made sense. If I desperately wanted a luxury sports car, people would question my priorities. If I desperately wanted political power, people would demand justification. But if I announce that I want to create an entirely new conscious being who will experience suffering and eventually die, suddenly the room fills with applause and inspirational music. Apparently, the more serious the consequences become, the less scrutiny we're supposed to apply. Human beings have somehow engineered a moral system that operates in reverse. The funniest part is the constant rhetoric about purpose and meaning. I want children because they give life meaning. Think about how absurd that statement actually is. Your solution to the problem of meaning is to create another person who will inherit the exact same problem. You are not solving anything. You are copying and pasting. It is the philosophical equivalent of responding to a house fire by constructing another house directly beside it and setting that one on fire too. Humanity has convinced itself that replication constitutes resolution. Every generation experiences suffering, confusion, uncertainty, mortality, and loss. Then instead of solving those problems, they manufacture another generation and hand them the exact same collection of problems. This process has been running continuously for thousands of years, and people still act like nobody is allowed to question the business model. What really stands out in this transcript is the complete inability to separate wanting something from being entitled to it. Every argument ultimately circles back to desire. They want families, they want children. They want motherhood, they want fulfillment, they want purpose. Wonderful. Human beings want all sorts of things. The existence of a desire tells us nothing about whether satisfying that desire is morally justified. Yet reproduction is treated as the one magical category where wanting automatically becomes permission. It's as though people believe strong feelings generate ethical authority. They don't. If anything, strong feelings are exactly when ethical scrutiny becomes most important because self-interest has a tendency to disguise itself as virtue. And that is perhaps the most irritating feature of the entire discussion. The child is always framed as the beneficiary when the actual beneficiaries are the adults. The adults get meaning. The adults get fulfillment. The adults get purpose. The adults get emotional satisfaction. The adults get family experiences. The adults get legacy. The adults get their dreams realized. Meanwhile, the child receives an aging body, vulnerability to disease, exposure to loss, psychological distress, uncertainty, and an eventual funeral. Yet somehow the person receiving all the benefits is called selfless while the person questioning the arrangement is accused of negativity. That is an extraordinary inversion of reality. What we're really witnessing is a cultural mythology so deeply embedded that people stop examining it entirely. Motherhood becomes sacred, reproduction becomes sacred, the desire to create new people becomes sacred. Once something achieves sacred status, questions are interpreted as attacks rather than inquiries. Instead of defending the idea, people defend their emotional attachment to the idea. The result is conversations like this one, where enormous claims are made about the beauty and virtue of creating life, while the most obvious question remains sitting in the middle of the room unanswered. If existence is such a gift, why is it acceptable to force it onto someone else without their consent? After thousands of years of poetry, religion, sentimentality, cultural conditioning, family traditions, inspirational speeches, and motherhood worship, humanity still has no coherent answer. It just has increasingly elaborate ways of avoiding the question.